Third time's the charm, I'm sure. At this point, I think I've talked to the class about my interest in using AI in the classroom. There's um, there's a running, I'm gonna call it a crisis, of teachers and college students being concerned about the place of education now that we have this technology. Now that we have basically genies that answer questions that seem uncriticable, like you can't criticize them. Um, I've recorded this 3 times and haven't fixed this typo. But here's the issue: ChatGPT was released in 2022, and there's a lot of concerns, not just about cheating, but about the cognitive ease that this technology is allowing students and individuals in general to access. And there's a flip side to this where college students are being so critical that they're thinking, why am I doing anything in college if it looks like ChatGPT is going to be able to do it all anyways? Um, so there's a lot of concern about this technology kind of taking our roles in education and in a lot of other spaces in the industry. So the question becomes, how can we work against this potential threat? And I'm using this alarmist language. Um, I feel like you can kind of tell what higher level framework I'm going for here. Uh, but there is a concern about how we can get students and teachers to work more critically with ChatGPT and other similar generative AI. This is new technology. It only came out 3 years ago, so I'm not going to say the research is sparse on it because everybody's interested in it, but it's not as much as you would think. Um, Mainly because, again, it's new and it's going to take a while for research to come out about this. But there has been a lot of not a, there's been research about it, especially when it comes to how whether or not teachers and students want to use the technology, and then if they are using it, how they're using it. Um, and these frameworks popped up. So the first one was TPAC, technological, pedagogical, and content knowledge, and it's this idea of the intersection between, do teachers know the content, do they know the pedagogy, how to teach, and do they know how to use the technology, and how does that work with AI? And it's a very interpretivist way of looking at it. I'm going to skip over TAM for a minute and go to KTMT, which is knowledge for teaching mathematics with technology. Yes. And it's a little bit different from TPAC. KTMT is more, how do we change the way we teach mathematics to be more dynamic with the technology that we're using? So how can we change students' experiences and how they understand math? What new representations can we make? And opportunities can we create for students? How can we pull out some misconceptions using technology more easily? Dr. Lovett's teaching a course this summer that's more or less about that exact same framework topic. And then how teachers can design or facilitate math learning in these tech-rich environments. And then TAM is technology acceptance model, which just involves how teachers, students, and any individual use the technology. There's 2 components to it. One is ease of use. Will I get annoyed if I have to use this technology? And then perceived usefulness. How useful is it for me to actually use this technology? Am I better off not using it? Or will I gain anything out of using it? And all 3 of these are they're very interpretivist. TPAC and KTMT for sure. TAM, it's kind of agnostic to all these. It could probably fit under any lens, but it still fits with this idea of like, how are students approaching it? How are teachers approaching it? But it's not really calling for much of a change in the way they perceive things. Um, so even if they are using it in their classrooms, what do they actually think about it? Are they just accepting the things that ChatGPT is generating arbitrarily or prima facie at face value? And we kind of want to change their scope of thinking or reasoning with AI. Dr. Sherry and I are actually doing that with some of our research. We're helping students create their own definitions using AI. So basically, students will come up with their definition, and they'll use ChatGPT as basically a Socrates. They'll give it their definition. ChatGPT will say, "Hey, what about this?" And then the student will be like, "Oh, I forgot about that. Let me fix that." And then they'll run it through a cycle. Um, and again, it's about using ChatGPT not just as a tool without thinking critically, because again, that'll easily just become, "Hey, let me copy paste this prompt, see what comes out." Um, but pushing them to, even if they do copy paste it, the prompt, uh, looking at that response and thinking, "Hey, does this thing actually make something better than what I could do on my own?" And it pushes students and teachers and honestly all individuals to look at this and be like, "This is a tool. I might be able to use this, but I can't accept it face value. I have to make sense of it. I have to create my own understanding and push back against it." And this calls for critical action, as opposed to any of the other ones. Critical theory, I guess I should have written, but in my head I was thinking critical action. And there's a very famous writing about this, Paulo Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed. Probably one of the most famous philosophical writings out there. And we went over it in Learning Theories. And his whole view is, hey, the oppressive regime is forcing our students to just take things face value. It's forcing things down their throats. They have no say in it. They're just passively memorizing things. They're not learning to think critically or form dialogue. And that's what's happening here. That's what's happening with ChatGPT. It's not happening by a higher authority. Some conspiracy theorists might say it's the technocracy, that they're like trying to get us to be a little bit more complacent. But it is a question of authority when it comes to A, should we just accept what ChatGPT says? And B, is it going to replace the way we interact with each other and the things that we can produce that are of value? And Ferry had this whole shtick or solution through the problem posing model, where he said that students should have the ability to have a dialogue, to reflect, to transform the knowledge that they're forming in ways that give them a sense of freedom, a sense of independence and identity. And he called this consciencioso. I speak Portuguese. I speak Spanish. Spanish is my language. This is Portuguese. I think I said it right. Anyways, that's the idea. That's the main theory that I want to work with at the mid-level, I guess. Alongside that, though, is the Vygotskian tradition, or Vygotsky's social constructivism, elements of constructivism. I know. Don't want to jingle jangle too much, but it works here not as the analysis, but as the honestly, it is constructivism, but it's not for the analysis. It's for the formation, for the transformation that we're trying to get. Because Vygotsky said, "Oh, we learn socially. There's this ZPD that we have to overcome, that gets overcome through interactions between individuals, where sure, there might be like a more knowledgeable person, but there's nothing stopping from the less knowledgeable person from overcoming what they need to learn. And they can do that either through their classmates, through guided dialogue with AI, like I talked about doing with Dr. Schreier, or through these through teacher-facilitated classroom discussions." My title said PSDs. I'm focused on PSDs. And the reason for this is Freire talked about how there's a reassessment of the role of the teacher in the classroom, where they're a co-learner. Sure, they might have a little bit more authority. They might be the ones kind of guiding the discussion, but they're there with the students, working side by side with them. And they're learning with the students, and they're being as critical as the students should be. So we want to make sure that if we have teachers in the classroom that have conditions social, then the teachers have to be able to carry that habit too. So we need to help. Oh yeah, it's right here. In order to aid students to break away from the banking model of teaching, teachers have to be able to break away from the model as well. And that's where my intervention comes in. The goal of the research design is to introduce and evaluate an intervention for pre-service teachers to help them form more critical habits when engaging with generative AI. And this is going to be a proof of concept of the activity. The research questions are, to what extent do pre-service teachers treat LLM outputs as end-all be-all, basically, in math context? Can a structured intervention increase participants' critical engagement? And you'll see it when I talk about the sessions. And then following the intervention, how do these pre-service teachers articulate the need for themselves or the future students to trust, doubt, or resist LLMs and their responses? The participants are pre-service teachers, undergraduate students enrolled in education majors. There's a three-part to the intervention. The first one is before anything, teachers will give their reflection or their understanding of like what the role should be of AI in the classroom. And it's a push of just asking them, hey, the question is just what role should ChatGPT have in the classroom? But following that, they'll go through a series of problems. They'll put in problems, mathematics problems, and then they'll evaluate the results, see if they agree or disagree with them, and after that, give a written reflection of their trust and rationale for relying or not relying with the AI's explanations. Session 2 is going to be the whole group discussion. So session 1 is individually. Session 2 is students will come together, and from the responses that ChatGPT gave, because I'm going to collect those, they'll go over them and together evaluate, hey, what is wrong about this response? What's wrong about that response? And then talk about how it would look in the classroom to work with these AIs. Then the third session, they're going to work to fix or revise whatever output ChatGPT gave to say, hey, how can we do this better? It's going to be a learning opportunity for these teachers with math, but it's also going to force them to think, hey, if students are using this, is it reflecting what we want them to learn? And is it, well, that's them being critical of the ChatGPT's response. But beyond that being, hey, how can we talk to students about how incorrect these might be sometimes? And it'll end with a reflection of what role, if any, should AI have in the classroom. And I'm speaking fast because I have 2.5 minutes left. Analysis. It's going to be thematic coding, and it's going to be done inductively, but it's going to be informed by the Freirean and Vygotskian constructs. So banking versus dialogical positioning. So banking being the students just take things without thinking critically. Dialogical being the back and forth critical response. Emergent epistemic agency, meaning students are in control of what they think and believe. And then for these pre-service teachers in particular, it's a pedagogical reasoning. Does it make sense for the responses that ChatGPT is giving out to my students and to me, for us to be working with this responses at this given level? Knowing what I know about education and pedagogy. Jeez, a minute and a half. Limitations and next steps. So I just, in my head while I was doing this, because I kind of run through all of these while I'm thinking, for all the different lenses that we could look through this. From a positivist perspective, somebody's going to say, hey, your sample's not representative. What are we actually learning from this? There's nothing universal about what we're creating here, because it'll be basically constricted to these students. And then from the interpreter's perspective, it's saying, hey, is it not worth to just evaluate the preconceptions without forcing them to think differently? And we are doing that. That's what the literature I talked about is kind of doing. But also, there is this crisis that everybody's talking about, that we want to work with, that we want to overcome. Next steps: run the design, analyze the reflections, and then evaluate the long term of this, because we're trying to change the way of thinking, habits of thinking. And that can't be done with one intervention. I know that. I feel like a lot of people realize that when it comes to changing minds or ways of thinking, it takes more than a single exercise. Thank you for listening to this. 15 minutes is not a long enough time for everything. Okay.